Welcome back to 16th India Digital Summit, Supercharging Startups organized by IAMAI, Internet and Mobile Association of India. The summit is supported by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, and Niti Aayog. We would like to thank our digital financial management partner, EaseBus, conversational messaging partner, Gupshup, session partner, GoQuick, gold partners, Manorma Online, Blink Digital, and Yellow.ai, silver partner, ShareChat. I'm Neha Gadi, your host for this session. It's time for our session on tech startups as value creators for the country. To deliver the session, we like to extend warm welcome to our honorable guest, Sri Jayant Sinha, Member of Parliament, Lok Sabha, and Chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance. The session will be moderated by Ms. Shweta Rajpal Kohli, Chief Public Policy Officer, Sequoia Capital. Over to you, Ms. Kohli.
Thank you so much, Neha, and it's an honor and a privilege for me to be moderating this session with none other than Sri Jayant Sinha. And of course, it's always an honor and privilege to talk to you. India clearly in the midst of a startup boom, whether we look at, funding or the number of unicorns or exits, check any parameter and it indicates that the startup ecosystem is flourishing. Clearly, we are now moving towards having perhaps the most innovative and exciting startup ecosystem in the world. But are tech startups truly value creators for the economy? Sir, we would love to hear from you more about this with your opening remarks before we move on to a conversation around this topic.
Thank you very much, Shweta, and wonderful to be with you and all the participants on this Internet and Mobile Association event for this digital summit. And I have participated in this summit for many, many years, and it's wonderful to see the excitement, to see the energy, to see the enthusiasm that is coming from our startup ecosystem. What I thought in my opening remarks, I little bit about what I see as being the main drivers for the economy in the medium term, and then talk about the longer term and what I think is going to be a very, very exciting set of areas for our startups to focus. Provide some historical perspective. I have been associated with the startup ecosystem in India decades. And we have been working hard since the 1990s to really enable our startups to flourish and become a very important driver of our economy. And I'm very pleased that after 30 years of trying, we are absolutely front and center as far as the economy is concerned. And if you step back and you look at the growth of our startup ecosystem, you'll see that it's gone through some very clear phases. The first phase, which I would call is the liberalization phase, is what happened in the 1990s when we had companies like Airtel and Infosys really take off. I mean, I well remember Infosys's IPO back in 1995. And I remember a time when Infosys was a $50 million revenue company and its market cap was just a few $100 million. Its market cap now is $100 billion, right? So that's the growth that we have seen from the first wave of startups that we had post-liberalization, and that is the liberalization wave that we had. The second wave, which is the wave that happened in the 2000s, saw the next major set of companies develop. And these included companies, of course, like Naukri, it included companies like Indigo, and all of these now are companies that are also super unicorns, that are also market capped of tens of billions of dollars. And these companies have done extraordinarily well. Now, the third wave of companies that we are seeing now, I would say that they are coming in the mobile era. So we had the liberalization era, then we had the internet era when companies like, Naukri took off, InfoEdge took off. And then now we have the era where mobile first companies have really taken off, like Paytm and Zomato and Swiggy and Nykaa and so on, where these have become very important and successful companies. And that's really the third wave. Now, the fourth wave that's yet to come, Shweta, is I think when we work on sustainability and green issues. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit in the third part of my opening remarks. But these are the waves through which our startup ecosystem has gone through. And in each wave, we've created these landmark marquee companies, each of which has created tremendous value for their owners, for their employees, and for India as well. Just think about our economy now, and think about the tremendous role that the IT services companies, the BPO companies, the financial services companies that got started in the 1990s, what a tremendous role they've played. Then think back to the companies of the 2000s, the Info Edges, the Indigos, and how important they are as a part of our economy right now. And of course, now we are with Zomato and Paytm and Swiggy and Nykaa, and they are adding so much value. So we've had wave after wave of innovation, wave after wave of startups coming through, and they've created tremendous value for our economy. They've transformed our economy. Now, let's talk about the medium term and why in the medium term, the growth of these startups, the growth of the startup ecosystem has become so important. If you look at where the Indian economy is today, as we start to exit these COVID years, hopefully Omicron will go through very quickly and we will finally exit these COVID years. The next 2 or 3 years, we think the economy is going to do very well. It should grow anywhere between 6 to 8% because there's a lot of fiscal and monetary stimulus from India and from all other economies in the world that has created very benign and good conditions for economic growth. And at this stage, there are 3 very important drivers that are driving the Indian economy. Number one, of course, is the infrastructure push by the government, where we are day by day improving the quality of our infrastructure, whether it's the digital infrastructure or the physical infrastructure. All of this is being improved in a massive and dramatic manner. That's a big growth driver for the economy. Second big growth driver for the economy is, of course, exports. So exports are booming right now. Again, as I said, there's been tremendous fiscal and monetary stimulus around the world, and that's helping exports quite a bit. The third area is, of course, startups. And of course, the number of unicorns that we have right now, the ability of us to be able to access capital, provide the capital so that our companies scale much faster, much quicker, in a more value creating way than ever before, is unprecedented. And so as a result of that, startups, which at one point were important for the economy, but not central to the economy, have now started to play a central role for the economy. And they will increasingly play that role over the next 2 or 3 years as well. They have, in fact, become one of the central growth drivers of the economy right now. And because the number is so large and because of the number of people that we're employing is so large, they're starting to play a very, very important and outsized role in the economy. And that's the medium term perspective. So our startups are tremendous value creators in that regard. Now, as we look beyond the next 2 or 3 years, Shweta, and start to talk about what we need to do over the next 5 to 10 years, which is in the longer term, the opportunities are absolutely extraordinary when we look at what is required to get to the green frontier. So the green frontier is, I think, what India's development model should be. And this green frontier is where our economy is both at the global frontier in terms of competitiveness. We are the most competitive economy in the world. And at the same time, we are a green, sustainable economy. So both getting to the frontier in terms of digital, in terms of cloud, in terms of AI, in terms of ML, that's incredibly important. We have to be a digital forward-looking economy and a competitive economy. But at the same time, we have to be a green economy as well. And there, Honorable Prime Minister has said we need to get to net zero by 2070. To get to net zero by 2070, we have to fundamentally change our emissions curve. We have to fundamentally change the way in which we use carbon in the economy. And if we were to change the way we use carbon in the economy, we go from a high carbon usage to low carbon and net zero carbon usage. We're going to have to transform almost every sector of our economy. Our power systems have to change, of course. Our transportation systems have to change. Heavy industry has to change. Chemicals, fertilizers, cement, steel, all of that has to change because it has to go to net zero. Our entire real estate sector has to change because our buildings have to become net zero. The way we get entertainment, the way we start looking at many of our important events, our restaurants, hospitality has to change. So every sector of the economy has to be transformed to make it net zero as well. So what we have to do to make a digital economy and what we have to do to build a green economy is something that's going to power our growth over the next 5 to 10 years. And here, Shweta, I'll conclude my opening remarks by saying that we have no choice. We have no choice. If we have to continue to grow, we have to be globally competitive. They have to be absolutely cutting edge in terms of our companies, in terms of our production processes, in terms of our innovation. And we also have to build a sustainable green economy. And a green economy is necessary not just because we have to reduce carbon emissions down to zero. Of course, we have to. Otherwise, climate change will make the world virtually unlivable for us. It's also vitally important from an air pollution point of view. Today, the official statistics are that we have lost about 500,000 people to COVID, which is a terrible tragedy. But medical experts, medical research is telling us that we're losing somewhere between 1 million to 1.5 million, 10 to 15 lakh people a year to air pollution. Air pollution is a vastly bigger problem than the COVID pandemic is in terms of its mortality rate. And therefore, we have to get to net zero. We have to reduce fossil fuel usage, not only to decarbonize, but also to save ourselves from the terribly damaging consequences of air pollution as well. And therefore, as I said, our startups have been great value creators. They have made a huge difference to the Indian economy over the last 30 years. But as we look forward to the long term, it is our startups, it is our innovative companies that will enable us to get to the green frontier and make our economy both competitive and sustainable. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have, Shweta.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. And of course, I'd love to talk to you in detail about Green Frontier, because we know that's something you've been championing and it is the need of the hour. I'll come to that in a bit. But first, to touch upon some of the other points that you mentioned, especially around the kind of wave that we're seeing with startups. And if we look at the kind of growth and innovation, a lot of it is coming on the back of tech-led startups. These are startups that on the bank of digital transformation are transforming the Indian economy across sectors, whether we look at education or healthcare or finance or payments. The kind of boom that we've seen is unprecedented, and a lot of it also coming on the back of initiatives that have come from the government, be it Aadhaar or UPI or demonetization. As we move forward, what, according to you, are sectors that will drive and continue to drive this growth? What, according to you, are looking promising sectors within the larger tech space, be it health tech, ed tech, fintech, that particularly excite you and you think will be the real value creators, as we call it, for the economy?
I see three areas in particular, Shweta, that I think are going to be very, very important in terms of the opportunities that they create, both for entrepreneurs as well as for India. You've stated one, of course, which is fintech. And fintech, of course, because of the India Stack, because of UPI, because of the account aggregator network that's now being established, is going to enable credit as well as payments to happen in an extremely seamless and friction-free manner. And that will enable us to do what very few economies can pull off, where we have public platforms, but we also have private innovation. And that very unique combination that we have developed in India enables us to deliver services at very, very affordable rates, but in a very friction-free, very seamless manner. And that, I think, will tremendously boost all kinds of financial services, whether it's credit, whether it's investments, whether it's insurance. All of these different financial products, I think, will get tremendous sort of encouragement from this. So fintech, I think, is very much the case. The second major area that I think is going to grow dramatically is healthcare. And in part because of the COVID pandemic has made us very concerned about wellness. But I think in general, Indians have become very conscious about their wellness, very conscious about their nutrition, very conscious about how they live their lives, because we have to really be in a situation where we are able to have sufficient immunity, sufficient reserves of our own physical well-being, that we can deal with problems like, for example, COVID. And so I think healthcare, the provision of healthcare, wellness in general, again, is going to be a tremendous growth area. The third growth area that I see coming up is broadly agriculture and food tech. This too is being transformed. Agriculture is being massively digitized. Many new business models are emerging. And food itself, much more nutritional food, much better quality food, much more efficient supply chains. All of these are being put together by a whole host of different startups that are taking off. So I think fintech, healthcare, and agriculture stroke food processing are going to be three areas where we are going to see tremendous opportunity going forward.
All right, so 3 areas clearly identified by Mr. Sinha. I want to focus on the first one that you talk about, fintech, and take it forward. It's true that when it comes to the digital payments ecosystem, 10 years ago, who would have imagined that India would perhaps have the most advanced digital payments ecosystem in the world? And today, just the transition we've made from being a pure cash economy to an economy that is now being driven by digital payments is absolutely, fantastic. As we move forward and we talk to many fintech companies, for instance, in our portfolio, what we pick up really is that fintech 2.0 will all be about digital banking, and that being a little different from neo banking as we know it, where there are traditional banks and then these are technology companies or fintech players that are providing services as a layer on top of traditional banks. But what we're already talking about is the kind of model that's being followed by many other countries, be it Singapore, be it UK, that say the time has come where you do not require physical branches of banks. The time has come when pure play fintech players need to get licensed and get put in place a regulatory regime where they can run as full scale banks and perform the services of full scale banks. So your thoughts as the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance, if India is ready for that digital banking revolution?
India is definitely ready. And I think the India stack enables it and makes it possible for us to have all digital banks. So in that sense, technically and technologically speaking, we are absolutely ready. Number one. Are our people ready? The people are also ready. I mean, आज के ज़माने में आप ठेले वाले के पास चले जाइएगा, उसके पास आपको नजर आएगा एक साइन जो कह रहा है कि मैं फोन पे लेता हूँ या मैं गूगल पे लेता हूँ. जब ठेले वाले, ऑटो रिक्शा वालों की तो बात ही छोड़ दीजिए, जब ठेले वाले लेने को तैयार हैं, सब्जी वाले लेने को तैयार हैं, तो हमारी आम जनता तो करने को तैयार है ही. So that shows the innovativeness and the willingness of our people to adopt new technologies, and they have consistently done that. So the people are ready, the technology is ready. Now what we have to put in place are the enabling regulations and policies to make it happen. And certainly government is seized of the matter. We in the legislative branch are obviously there to support and provide whatever legal frameworks and legislative frameworks are required to enable this to happen. And I think, all of these innovations, all of these approaches should be encouraged.
Exciting area that is also slightly controversial is around crypto and Web3. And of course, tons of excitement and conversations around that area. And again, as chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance, we understand you've been having very active conversations. The concerns are legitimate. There are, of course, concerns that both the legislature as well as the executive is going to have around, a new technology that is emerging. At the same time, there are many who believe that India cannot afford to ignore crypto as an opportunity, and it's an opportunity that India should go ahead and seize rather than, for instance, ban it. What is the thoughts that is emerging right now, especially within the legislature around the debate that is currently going on around regulating crypto more as an asset than as a currency?
Shweta, we have to be cognizant of where we are in the process right now. Where we are in the process is that there is obviously trading going on with crypto assets in India. There are various views on how large that trading is, what is the total outstanding value of these crypto assets in India. The industry has a certain view. We don't know whether that is correct or not correct, but it is very sizable. Second, the government has been seized of the matter and has been working on legislation to this effect. That legislation was discussed in terms of bringing it to Parliament in the winter session. That didn't happen. And now we have to see when the government is actually going to introduce a bill to regulate crypto and crypto technologies. So we have to wait and see when that legislation is introduced. In the meanwhile, because of the interest that honorable members have in this area, we've conducted a hearing in the Standing Committee on Finance, where we invited all the key stakeholders to come and present their views on the matter. And so that too has happened. We will now have to wait for the executives, that is the government, to introduce the bill. And then depending on whether it comes to committee or not, we will see how that legislation moves forward. In all these cases, Shweta, whether it is financial technology such as India Stack or crypto or technology in general, there is always a balance that has to be struck between regulation and innovation. And the goal of regulation is to enable orderly functioning of markets, protection of consumers, fair and ethical conduct of competitors. These are the goals of regulation. At the same time, there's innovation, which is creating new value, new approaches to doing things. And that balancing act between regulation, which is in the best interests of the public, and innovation always has to be taken into account when a regulatory framework or a legislative framework is created. So that's why we have to wait for the executive, that is government, to initiate this process by bringing to Parliament the proposed legislation, and then we will study it and then develop our views on that. But that is where we are in the process right now.
I think you raised a very important point around regulation versus innovation, because that remains at the heart of the entire tech ecosystem right now. As we start looking at more innovations, more emerging technologies, more new business models emerging, there is this constant worry and fear, especially amongst the startup ecosystem, that is regulation keeping pace with innovation? And are we going to see knee-jerk reactions coming in by way of, stringent regulations, especially at a time when these some of these technologies are difficult to understand? I mean, these are technologies that are so new and so emerging. Globally, policymakers and regulators are struggling to understand how best to regulate them in a way that consumer interest is kept in mind, the government's concerns are kept in mind, and yet innovation and growth do not suffer. So,
Shweta, let me interrupt you here.
Sure.
I think there's one thing that has to be very clear as far as industry stakeholders are concerned. One thing has to be very clear. The essence of democracy is what is called consent of the governed. Consent of the governed. Okay. So whether it is the legislative branch or the executive branch or the judiciary, which are the three branches of the state. Okay. All of what we do is on the principle of consent of the governed. That is, the public is in charge. Let me just put it simply. The public is in charge. We are just instruments of the public. So our job is to just basically hear what stakeholders say and do, and then try and present, an appropriate balance as far as regulation and innovation is concerned. And therefore, I want to make it very clear that stakeholders need to make their voices heard. They are the public. And stakeholders with respect to the industry, stakeholders with respect to the public at large, investor protection groups, all of these people have to engage in debate in the public arena. They have to bring their voices there. They have to explain what their point of view is, whether it is through the print media, electronic media, social media, whatever it is. But it is the voice of the public, it is the consent of the governed that is very important. So in a way, we are responding to the concerns of the public, we are responding to the concerns of the stakeholders, and we are going to try and fashion for them a regulatory framework that works best for them. We are here to serve your interests, not our interests, right? So let's be very clear. But unless your interests are clearly communicated, clearly defined, we cannot move forward. And there, yes, this is part of the democratic process, that every stakeholder has different interests, right? And the process of the executive and the legislative branch is such that we adjudicate between these different interests and present back to you what we think is the appropriate balance between them. But it has to start, the genesis of this, the start of this is that stakeholders have to express in a very crystal clear way what their interests are, right? So it's a bottoms up process. It's not that top down process. That's democracy.
What's heartening is that the democratic process has to continue working and is working, because at least the stakeholder consultations are happening. As you yourself mentioned, you've been in conversation with the right players. Say, for instance, in the crypto technology industry, you've been having these active conversations, and then that's the right way perhaps to arrive at the best answers on what would be perhaps a win-win, or at least a balancing act between various stakeholder interests, as you said. Moving on now to talk about another point that you mentioned in your opening remarks about creating those $100 billion enterprises. Many believe that the startup ecosystem is also presenting itself in a way that we are creating India for the world companies. So now many of our startups are not just startups that are creating value for India and the Indian economy, but they are ready to go out and capture and make a mark on the global stage. When we talk to startups, again, one ask or one clear reform measure that they highlight is allowing Indian startups to list directly overseas on international exchanges is something that they believe will be that biggest unlock or reform generator that is required for the startup ecosystem. We understand, of course, that the Parliament has already moved forward on this process. The Companies Amendment Act has provided the necessary legislative room for this reform to be implemented. What's awaited now, of course, is the policy changes that are required to make this reform a reality. Your thoughts, Mr. Sinha, on why this could be that game changer for the startup ecosystem?
I don't know whether I would call it a game changer, Shweta, but I think it's a very important step forward for the startup ecosystem because what it does is it enables our startups to access even deeper pools of capital. That's a good thing. And it raises their visibility and it enables them to grow on the global stage in a way that is very beneficial for them. So I think all those are very important steps. On the other hand, and there is always an other hand, of course, because that's why the balancing act is what we have to do all the time. The other hand is, of course, the revenue leakage that goes along with that, right? We can't have a situation, Shweta, please understand, where all of India's important economic activity is domiciled outside of India, right? We need to strengthen India. We need to strengthen Indian companies. We need to have companies that are domiciled in India and grow from India and create jobs and employment in India. Every country in the world shares those goals, Shweta. So we need to strike that balance between enabling companies to list overseas while at the same time maintaining economic activity and maintaining control of our destiny as well. And that's how I think of Atmanirbharta. So as the Honorable Prime Minister said, we want to build an Atmanirbhar India. And Atmanirbhar India means we control our destiny. If our destiny is outside of our territorial boundaries, outside of India, then it becomes much more difficult to control our destiny. So again, that's where the balancing act comes in. So given that framework, how we enable direct listing to happen so companies remain domiciled, that we prevent revenue leakage while enabling them to access global markets, global capital, that's the balancing act.
Sure, and that's exactly the voice that we hear from many in the startup ecosystem, that actually one of the reasons why some companies choose to get domiciled overseas is because they do not have, right now, the current law does not permit them to access global capital. And as we've always maintained, there will be a large set of startups that would still choose and prefer to list on domestic markets simply because the home ground is the best ground to list. And we've seen some huge successes in the last year itself, whether we look at Nykaa or Zomato. Those are examples that clearly reflect that yes, the domestic ecosystem is alive and kicking, and it is the right market to list for many companies. But then there are those small set of companies who believe that their business models are better understood by stock market exchanges overseas. It is an ongoing conversation. Of course, startup ecosystem hugely expecting that the upcoming budget will provide for those enabling provisions that would allow them this reform. But moving forward now to talk about other sectors, you highlighted, of course, health tech, fintech, as well as agri-tech and food tech as the key areas. Another area where we believe India is becoming a huge value creator and an area which has been propelled immensely by the pandemic is education and edtech. India now home to the world's most valued edtech companies, and that clearly is a sign that India could be the edtech capital of the world. Interestingly, we're on a platform of IMAI that today has also made a significant announcement that India's largest edtech companies have come together to form a consortium under IMAI that will adopt a code of conduct to enable best practices within the edtech ecosystem. This in some ways reflects maturity of an industry that is willing to self-regulate and move forward, at the same time address concerns that either consumers or the government may have. Your thoughts overall on how some of these sectors should move forward on a self-regulatory model, and why you believe that may or may not work well for sectors like EdTech?
No, so self-regulation is very important, and I very much welcome EdTech companies stepping forward and establishing a code of conduct. Shweta, not everything can be addressed through legislation or rulemaking. Many aspects of competitive conduct, market conduct, are best left to market participants to sort out for themselves. I'm a fervent believer in that. And it is only when self-regulation and competitive conduct goes past ethical and other norms, that's when you really have to come in and establish legal rules of the game. So the first thing that should always be in place should be self-regulation. And so therefore, I very much encourage and welcome these steps taken by the edtech industry. My only appeal to them would be to make sure that it is being done in a very genuine and thoughtful manner, and that it reflects the best self-regulation in the world. And hopefully they have benchmarked themselves to edtech companies around the world and to other self-regulatory regimes that might exist, and made sure that what they are proposing is the best in the world.
That's right. And I'll quickly touch upon one other sector before we move on to Green Frontier, which I know is something that I wanted to reserve the best for the last, because it's a topic that's very close to your heart. But gaming is another sector, which is seeing again a lot of concerns around regulations. And as they become value creators, on one hand, we of course have Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi talking about how India can be the gaming hub for the world, and we have so much tech talent that can generate that. But we are a democratic setup, and the setup is also all about states driving certain regulations and the center driving certain regulations, and this coming perhaps within the ambit of states. What we have as a result now is an industry that is seeing way too many legal battles being fought by the states and the gaming companies, which really doesn't help anybody, because innovation gets hampered. There is a slowdown when it comes to growth in these sectors, and there is confusion in the minds of consumers. Again, your thoughts on whether we can resolve for some of these concerns by having a central legislation on such subjects which otherwise may seem to be state subjects.
So Shweta, you bring up many important points in that question. The first very important point is around constitutionality, right? And what is in the state list versus what is in the concurrent list versus what is in the central list. So we will have to look at that and to see whether lotteries and so on, gaming is firmly in the state list. If it is, then it's a constitutional issue, and it's not something that can be resolved very quickly and simply. It becomes a constitutional matter. So that's one aspect of this. Then the second aspect of this is, what are the societal norms? What are the societal norms that we've had in our traditions? And one of our most important traditions, or most important stories, mythologies, revolves around a dice game, as you know very well. So we've had a long tradition of thinking about these issues and recognizing what are the negative consequences of that. So we have to take into account those societal traditions as well. And then the third aspect of what you're bringing up is whether there is a way for this to become something that can be dealt with through one legislative or regulatory package. So that also we are going to have to consider whether there is some elegant way of pulling that off. So those have all got to be issues and aspects that have to be considered. But I'll conclude my observations with the following thought, which is that, again, as I was saying earlier, the interests of various stakeholders have to be summoned forth, and they have to be brought forth into the public arena. What is it that people believe? What is it that the gaming industry believes? What is it that the states believe? What is it that consumer advocates and consumer activists believe? What is it that other stakeholders in society believe? Unless we can have a proper and thorough discussion of these issues in a reasoned way, in a rational way, finding that balance through a democratic process will become very difficult. So if I was a company in the gaming industry, I would make sure that we would get as much debate, as much discussion as possible on these issues. Only then a consensus can emerge, which can then either be appropriately legislated at the state level or at the central level.
Now coming to the last topic around the Green Frontier, I know you are excited to talk about it, and you mentioned how it's very important to support innovation in that space, whether it is models that are talking about resolving climate change issues, or the general move towards sustainability. The one question that I have for you here is that one, of course, is important that the entire ecosystem supports some of these innovations, and very happy to share that Act Grants, which is an initiative of venture capital firms as well as startups, has come out with an initiative to support innovation and business models for solving for some of these climate change models. So very happy that to share that we have that realization within the ecosystem that we need to solve for some of this. But do you also think that there is a need for startups to start building sustainability within their business models? Because very often we see that sustainability is something that comes to mind only for startups that have achieved, only for companies that have achieved a certain size and scale. And that's when you start talking, sustainability, you start talking climate change. How important is it for the startup ecosystem that's growing at the pace at which it is to start adopting it as part of its DNA right on and early on?
Shweta, you're absolutely right. As far as net zero is concerned, as far as sustainability is concerned, that has to be in the DNA of every single individual and certainly every single company. This is a question of saving the world. Our world is going to be thoroughly inhospitable in 20 to 30 years. We already have carbon at 420 parts per million in the atmosphere. About 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade of global mean temperature warming is already going to happen. What that actually means is temperatures all over India are going to go up tremendously in the summer. And there are various scientific studies that have shown that India is going to be among the worst affected countries in the world because of the combination of heat, humidity, cyclones, and glacial melting. So you put that combination together and it tells us that our India is going to be very seriously affected, even if we get to net zero. Because about 1.5 to 2, right now, after Glasgow, people are saying that 2.4 degrees centigrade is bound to happen. Even if we get to net zero by 2050, we are going to have 2 degrees centigrade. Do you know what 2 degrees centigrade of higher temperature means? Since the industrial era started in 1800 AD till now, we've had in total 1.2 degrees centigrade rise. We are going to get a minimum by 2100 of 2 degrees. So where we are roughly right now, we are going to double that. So the flooding that we are seeing, the cyclones that we are seeing, the heat waves that we are seeing, right? The glacial melting that we are seeing, we are losing our Himalayan glaciers, Shweta. So this is not something where we have a choice. This is not an afterthought. This is not what we do 10 years later. This is what we have to do now to save our planet, to save our lives. And as parents, and all of us have our children, what is the world we are going to leave behind for them? So we have no choice in this matter. We have to do it. We have to do it today. And it has to be in the very DNA of what we do as individuals, as companies, as institutions, as legislature, government, whatever. All of us have to do it. There's no question about it. Now, the very good news, Shweta, is that net zero is net positive. The very good news is that net zero is net positive. So while we need to save the world, we can actually do a fantastic job as far as economic growth is concerned, as far as job creation is concerned, as far as cleaning up the air is concerned, because we are moving towards net zero. So this is one of those moments where we have a tremendous win-win ahead of us, but we've got to start to bend the curve now. We don't have a moment to waste. And not only therefore is it a fantastic opportunity, that's why net zero is net positive. Again, net zero is net positive. So whether you're building electric vehicles, or solar powered plants, or battery charging technology, or new plant proteins, or other ways to decarbonize, whether you're doing it from a profit perspective, or whether you're doing it to save the planet, in either case, you're going to do extraordinarily well. But we have to recognize, Shweta, that this has to be our number one priority. There's nothing more important for India and for the world right now than to get onto a decarbonization trajectory, because this is not something that happens in 1 year. We have to get on a trajectory that moves and moves and moves for 30 to 40 to 50 years. And that's when we get to net zero. And the decade of the 20s, this is a decisive decade for us, because either we're going to be on a trajectory where emissions are going to continue to go up for India, or we're going to be in a trajectory where we can bend the curve. That choice is going to be ours to make. And even if we make the choice, even if we get to net zero by 2050, 2070, the planet is still going to warm by at least 2 degrees centigrade. So along with mitigation, which is bring it down to net zero, we seriously have to think about adaptation as well, which means that, what are we going to do with more cyclones, more heat waves, higher humidity, glacial melting, more flooding that goes along? All that is already going to happen. That's completely predictable. That's the future. So yes, it's absolutely necessary that we do it. But the good news is, even as we are doing it, a lot of people will create tremendous value and could generate tremendous wealth for themselves and for their companies by doing it. So that's kind of where we are right now. So I think as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned, the startup ecosystem needs to make a massive pivot, as you say. You've got to make a massive pivot. Okay. And the pivot is whatever you're doing, forget about that. Start thinking sustainability. Start thinking about how you're going to get to the green frontier. And the green frontier means digital plus green. If you're digital plus green, that's how we take India forward.
All right. On that note, we're going to end the session. But the message from Mr. Jayant Sinha is very clear. And that is that what better way to create value than to be digital and green both. But of course, we've enjoyed this conversation with you, sir. Overall on the startup ecosystem, overall on how tech startups are creating value for India, and so many interesting issues that.
So Shweta, let me just pause you.
Sure.
So startups have created value for India, which is fantastic. Now they have to save India. Because the innovation and the growth and getting to the green frontier is going to be driven by our startup ecosystem. And I completely believe that.
All right. Thank you so much. And it's always an honor and a pleasure to talk to you and get your insights on a wide range of subjects. Thank you so much for your time. It's over to you, Neha.
Thank you so much, Shweta. Thank you for putting all the questions so beautifully, and thank you so much, Mr. Sinha, for giving us such insightful session. It's really a pleasure, and we really thank you for your time. Thank you to all the audience who kept watching and have given such great comments. Stay tuned for the next session.